by people taking action around inclusive hiring. So hopefully lots of lessons to be learned, lots of good hot tips to be taken, and some practical examples of where things have worked well. So it's not a theoretical session, so get your notepads ready, although we will be sending out obviously action points and notes at the end of it. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. We've got quite a lot to get through, so I think we'll plow on quite quickly. But just introducing myself, first of all, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Kate Headley. I'm one of the directors and actually the founder of the Clear Company. The Clear Company was founded on the principle of inclusive hiring, and for the first 10 years, that's literally all we did. So we have a core focus and an absolute passion and commitment around creating an inclusive hiring environment, both internally and through the recruitment sector. I'm also a Disability and Access Ambassador for the recruitment sector, appointed by Cabinet Office, though goodness only knows what's going to happen with that over the next few months, obviously. And I chair the Recruitment Industry Disability Initiative, which is a programme of work run by volunteers to pioneer change in the recruitment sector around inclusive hiring. And those of you who'd like to know more, please do message me directly, and we can engage you with that programme of work, which is all completely free and just about people having shared ambition to change the world a little bit every day. So that's just me, and I'll go around the table and introduce my colleagues on the panel, which is, if I can start with you, Faye Kennedy, Head of Talent Acquisition International at Markel International.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Kate.
And then we've got Pauline Miller, Chief Equity Officer at Dentsu.
Hello, everyone. And just to say, Dentsu's an advertising agency and not a denture company, as somebody once told me.
Excellent. So you've got great purchasing and influencing power at Dentsu, which I'm sure we'll hear more about, Pauline. We look forward to that. Thank you. We're awaiting Mark Lomas, who's got slightly delayed. So and he was headlining. So I'm just going to start by saying that that the principles around inclusive hiring are that it never just starts with attraction. And what all of our speakers are going to share with you today is the things that we can do right the way along the recruitment life cycle that affect change and impact on our ability to not only attract, but to sensitively and inclusively hire a diverse community into our organisations and give them a positive experience. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Faye, but with Mark not being here, we're going to start with the story of Markel International and all of the work that you've done there. We've got a case study coming from Lloyd's at a later stage, and then we've also got Pauline's insights as one of the exec members of the Recruitment Industry Disability Initiative. What we'd like to do, though, as part of today is a temperature check. Because my day job and the day job of a number of the team members supporting this event is to go into organisations and audit their recruitment selection processes. So we pick up a lot of intelligence around where the major barriers and opportunities lie. But we'd really like to hear from you about what you're doing, what's working for you, and what you've got in place, and really where we can focus our next events to make sure that we're giving you the insights that you require. And an example of how we've done that very recently is that we held a fireside chat, which some of you will have been at. And we learned from that a number of organisations were putting in place inclusive hiring training, but because they hadn't got an inclusive mechanism for hiring again, so they hadn't got set criteria, for example, there was no clarity around that. But actually the hiring decisions, although more transparent, they still weren't resulting in that diversity of hire, because we'd missed a chunk in the journey, as it were. And that's the sort of thing we want to learn from you today. So there's a QR code on the screen. If you could all copy that and complete the survey for us, it will only take literally a minute. That would be really, really helpful intelligence for us to inform our next event with you. Do we just leave that up for a wee while, Maria? Yeah, that's great. Just to say, we will have a Q&A session at the end with lots of opportunity to ask the panel. They've all been briefed to give us a nice, succinct introduction to the work that they're doing, and then we'll follow up with a Q&A session at the end of today. So you will have an opportunity to pose your questions through the chat, which Maria and our team will moderate for us. Any questions unanswered, we'll aim to get back to you with some responses on after the event. And we'll also be sending out some nice little goodies and freebies for you as a result of the event, an opportunity to get involved in more things. But it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Faye, who I've worked with now since 2018, maybe 2019, a number of years, and I've seen the tremendous work you've done at Markel, so I'm looking forward to you sharing that with us all here today. So thanks very much, Faye.
Thank you, Kate. And Claire, I think there have been some requests for the QR code to go back up, so I'm not precious about my slides. If you'd rather me just talk through everything to have the QR slide on the screen, that's absolutely fine. It's up to you. So yes, thank you, Kate, and good morning, everybody. So first up, Kate has tasked me with sharing why inclusive hiring remains a priority for me as a senior influencer in the global talent acquisition market. And my answer is pretty much threefold. Do you want to go to the first slide, please? So aside from this being obviously the right thing to do, inclusivity is very much a part of our people-powered culture here at Markel. And to give you a bit of a flavour on what people-powered actually means, Markel underwent a rebranding last year where we appointed an external consultancy to gain some insights into the perception of Markel from not only our brokers and our insureds and suppliers, but also our employees. And the results returned with an overwhelming emphasis on our culture, obviously most notably the people who live and breathe it. So our people-powered branding was born with an employee value proposition to underpin that. Markel is now positioned as a leading global specialty insurer with a truly people-first approach. And what this does is it kind of speaks to our commitment to customers, suppliers, shareholders, and employees, as well as the communities that we serve. The brand was very much born from the Markel style, which was a set of guiding principles that were written by a former chairman back in 1986, which have helped shape and continues to define our culture. And so in order to stay true to that brand, because those of you who know me, authenticity is really important. It's important that Markel gives all people the opportunity to contribute to what makes this organisation such a great place to work. And so it's my job to ensure that we're embedding and following practices in the hiring process that do just that. Next slide. Secondly, I think we're all well aware of the long-standing reputation of the insurance market and some of the less than favourable practices and behaviours and mindsets that have shaped the perception of the industry over the years. So this detrimentally impacts the success of our business and the industry more broadly. So I obviously have a vested interest in changing those perceptions to help increase the flow of quality talent that we attract to the organisation. But in addition to that, insurance is really important. I mean, it underpins our entire global economy, and it's actually doing a lot of good in the world. And contrary to popular belief, it's actually very interesting. So it's my mission to change those legacy perceptions by creating opportunities through fair, open and transparent recruiting practices to help showcase how committed to change we are at Markel and the industry more broadly, genuinely. And lastly, just one quick one, it makes good business sense. I mean, we all know that there's a wealth of evidence demonstrating the numerous benefits to organisations to have inclusive practices, such as innovation, retention, improved financial performance, and of course, those broader talent pools. So how are we doing this at Markel? Next slide, please. So we've implemented inclusive hire in a number of ways across Markel. I do not claim for us to be pioneering in any way. We do have a bit of a way to go on this journey, but just to give you a sort of a high-level overview of some of the things that we've implemented here. First and foremost being the delivery of the recruiting right training, which is Markel's take on the Lloyd's inclusive hiring training. It's very much the foundation of the inclusive hiring practices that we've implemented here at Markel. It was created and is still facilitated by the Clear Company. It's an ever-evolving programme that's delivered to all of the territories that we operate in across the globe, apart from Europe at the moment, but we've rolled it out now across the UK, Canada and the APAC region. And it's been absolutely integral in our efforts to educate hiring managers on the importance of inclusive hiring practices. This is then backed up by our recruiting standards, which is a document that I wrote 3 years ago to replace our standard recruitment policy. And essentially it outlines the way that we expect hiring managers to approach recruitment and is very much positioned through a diversity and inclusion lens to further embed the practices that the managers learn in the training. And it combines the why with the how. In an easy and interactive format that managers can return to time and time again. Further inclusive practices are embedded in our early careers offerings, where we partner with organisations such as Sanctuary Graduates and The Brokerage, who some of you may have heard of, the latter being a social mobility charity who are committed to helping young people from working class and ethnic minority backgrounds to find suitable employment. And I'm a massive advocate for channeling change and driving better and more inclusive behaviours through any early careers channels. And we've recently run a career returners program, which has been aimed at offering opportunities to individuals who've been out of work for 18 months or longer. That could be for any reason, including, raising children, those with caring responsibilities, or even health-related reasons. And I'm proud to say that we located 4 experienced individuals who will work with us on a 6-month contract to begin with, in the hope of converting their contract to a permanent one at the end, if both they and we are happy with the partnership. We've partnered with a networking organisation to help deliver this, who are also providing the returners with an ongoing coaching programme to help reintegrate them back into the workplace and obviously help increase their confidence in the process. So this is just, conscious of time, this is just a very high-level snapshot of the work that we're doing in this space. Of course, all of this is backed up by our internal inclusive behaviours policy, inclusive recruiting practices, which are further embedded via the recruitment team, as well as the work that we do to ensure that when we do make a hire, we've created an environment for employees to thrive in once they get here. And most of that great work is done via our internal employee resource groups, such as the Inclusion Network. So what have we learned? I've personally seen a huge mindset shift across the organisation over the past few years. Nepotism is now the exception, it's no longer the rule. Hiring managers are proactively looking for ways and suggesting ways that we can widen the net to ensure that we're offering opportunities to the widest variety of individuals, which I think is really encouraging. Now, I don't think that's all solely driven from a place of desperation in terms of the skills shortages, although that probably plays a part, but I think it genuinely comes from us cultivating a better educated workforce who are aware of the benefits and importance of a diverse and inclusive workplace. It's important to ensure that our hiring practices are backed up by the wider business in terms of creating an environment, as I've just said, and exec buy-in is also essential. We're very lucky here that we have a number of individuals that are involved in D&I at a very senior level, not least Nick Lyon, our Chief Underwriting Officer, and he's helped us develop a D&I business case. So I think equipping ourselves with the stats and the reasons why a diverse and inclusive workplace has helped improve retention, productivity, innovation, etc. And all of this has meant that we've exceeded the Lloyd's hiring targets for the past few years for both women in leadership and the aspiration of 1 in 3 ethnic minority hires. So we're circling somewhere around the 35% of all hires are made from an ethnic minority background now. So something is obviously working. As I say, we still have a way to go before we can consider ourselves disruptors, but we are making positive progress. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions when we get to Q&A a little bit later on, but I hope that gives you a bit of a high-level whirlwind tour of some of the initiatives and practices that we've got here. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Faye, and thanks for answering to that question. Why is it still important after all these years? And I think that's why we wanted you here today, because at the beginning in 2018, 2019, when we had all the enthusiasm, the passion, it was a full two-day course, and clearly we've evolved it since then, but there is still a waiting list for these programs, which speaks volumes. But and congratulations on achieving those objectives for Lloyd's, and indeed exceeding those objectives for Lloyd's. And as we've got Mark on the line as well, I'm sure he's making notes, although knowing his attention to detail, he will have already known those stats. So without further ado, I'm actually going to move on to Asmart to share with us the Lloyd's story, which is really about understanding how Lloyd's have managed to shift so dramatically in the first half of this year, their stats in line with the conversation that you've just had, Faye, and what steps were taken to achieve that, and why it wasn't just one thing, really, Mark, I think is what we're trying to pull out here. And if you can just make it so it's accessible for everybody, nobody needs to think, this is so huge, I don't know where to start, because actually these are fairly fundamental steps which added together have created a seismic shift for Lloyd's, which we're all keen to hear about, hot off the press.
Great. Well, thank you, Kate. Yes, I think to start with, although I'm going to lay out a number of steps that we've gone through, I think the thing to keep in mind is each of these steps are fairly practical, fairly easy to implement for the most part. And then I think the culmination of all that practice has meant a real improvement in our hiring performance. And I'll talk a little later about kind of how that is kind of underpin and measure that with data. But if I start at the beginning of the process, the very first thing for us was having a look at the Lloyd's website, where people go to find our job opportunities. Indeed, where we go and advertise our job opportunities. Specifically looking at the accessibility, not only of our own website and hiring pages and culture pages to start with, but also being very specific about the accessibility of some of the broader job boards we use. And using the data we have on applications to make sure that we kind of try and effectively target those job boards or those places where people will go for information for job opportunities a bit better than our previous approach. Our kind of second spaces and our second kind of bit of the process was to really understand how people absorb the job descriptions that we release, and understanding very clearly the process by which they go from the line manager to the culture team to the TA team to kind of publication, and being quite specific in ensuring that the criteria used are as objective as possible and remove subjectivity. And that includes, for example, catching where managers have put in, well, you must have insurance of the insurance market, for example, or requiring qualifications that aren't maybe necessary for the role. And that JD screening process is something that we do consistently at Lloyd's for each of our hires, and that does make a considerable difference, particularly as to how accessible the candidates feel the roles are. And although for us it's a fairly manual process at the moment, due to our volume of hiring and upskilling line managers, that process works very well for us and ensures that we don't screen candidates out before they've even really got into the process. We do consider our use of social media. Now, I'm not saying for a second that Lloyd's is so cool we recruit through TikTok. We haven't quite got there yet. But we do consciously use our partners to promote our opportunities via social media, and are far more considerate about how we use things like LinkedIn, employee advocacy videos, and the like is our kind of some of our next steps in bringing our roles to life on social media. And then I suppose it comes to the preparation for hiring. And this is where over the last sort of few months, we took a little step back and looked at how our competency frameworks were being used. And no doubt we made some effort in introducing those competency frameworks, but they weren't necessarily working very well for a hiring manager. We have our values framework at Lloyd's, and what we wanted to do was make a real consistency in assessment between how we were recruiting people versus what we were our expectations of them when they came through the door. And it was really important for us that we ensured that our values framework was part of the recruitment process. So we worked with Clear Company to turn our values into a set of competency-based questions, and really importantly, with both positive and negative indicators. Why? Primarily because of driving consistency of assessment. In addition to those values questions, and there are 3 values questions, we have 3 values in every interview, and there's a kind of a bank of values questions that managers can choose from. There are also 3 technical questions, and those are agreed with the TA team, the talent acquisition, and the hiring manager, meaning we get a fantastic balance between technical questions and behavioral competencies in a way that really has proved to us sets the bar quite high for candidates, gives us some great evidence on which to make decisions. And what we found is that really it can be a really useful difference maker. And those value-based competency questions are then leveled. So they kind of build in complexity as you go up through the grade structure. Meaning we can really test kind of at a senior management level, at a junior manager level, and an employee level, kind of our expectations around values and behaviors. That is an incredibly important part of kind of the recruitment puzzle. And aligned to that is not assuming that managers or leaders are skilled in inclusive recruitment. And so we have a program that ensures that if you're a hiring manager, you have to be accredited for inclusive recruitment at Lloyd's. That includes the course, that includes filling out assessments. And we're quite proud of that. We're quite proud of that, primarily because it really does help improve the evidence base and the decisions that you're coming to. And we've worked and continue to work really hard to make sure that those recruitment decisions, which we feel are an investment, that those are evidence-based and really robust. And then all of that's great, but how do we measure the impact that that's had? And we're able to measure diversity in the recruitment process at each stage of that process. And what we found is that we're attracting a hugely diverse range of candidates. Year to date, for example, the percentage of ethnically diverse candidates is around 50%. So, and that's a huge increase for us. The percentage of women candidates is around 40%. And as we monitor kind of what's going through the recruitment process, we're able to see since the introduction of the values framework, the accredited hiring process to support that, and the data and analytics that support line managers, our hiring rates are around 40% for ethnically diverse groups over this year, almost a perfect 50-50 split on gender at this point in the year, and over 10% kind of disabled hires as we go through the year. So by taking little actions at each stage of that process, we've been able to really improve our hiring performance over the last year. And I have no doubts we'll continue to learn, we'll continue to adjust what we do. But I think it is the kind of the little interventions at each stage of the process and introducing the values competency questions, which are leveled for grade, which have made a big difference for us. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions later.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks for all that detail. A couple of points. Interestingly, so you started with the discussion around the job descriptions, and as you know, we audit recruitment selection processes. That's kind of our day job here at the Clear Company, or one of them. And we're still at that level where 99% of our audits, we find that the job descriptions are non-inclusive, and they are at the heart, the biggest foundational barrier that then tracks through the whole selection process. So it's interesting that that's the point at which Lloyd started. Mark, when Faye told her story from Markel, she explained that a number of things that had helped to keep it relevant and front of the agenda, including that ExCo support and sponsorship, if you like. We hear regularly, when we're talking to hiring managers, we've been interviewing for the last 2 decades. You can't tell us anything we don't know. Trust my gut instinct, etc. How did you manage to get the Lloyd's team, or have you managed to get managers at Lloyd's willingly to embrace this new process and support it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in 2 ways. Number one, culture is part of the 4 strategy pillars of Lloyd's overall, so it's kind of set in what we do. And then I think the second part of it is the framework is easier to use. There's a better balance between the technical and the values-based questions. There's consistency. There's consistency of kind of measurement. It takes away a lot of that instinct kind of discussion and leads it back to evidence. And I think the combination of usability, effectiveness, kind of the evidence-led approach, and the data, which we can then play back, has meant that kind of people see that as a continuous kind of improvement cycle. And therefore, and it is also bluntly an expectation. So it's both built into the fabric of, making it usable, making it effective, making it accessible, good evidence, but also it's set as an expectation, right? You don't hire unless you've got inclusive hiring accreditation. So there's both the kind of carrot and the stick, if you like, and then what line manager doesn't like getting a fantastic hire? And I think that's really the proof in the pudding, because the process is leading to really good hires.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Mark. And I love it as well, the way that you introduced at the beginning, that putting this inclusive process in place actually raised the bar. Because there's a common myth, isn't there, that if we talk about diversity of hire, then are we lowering the bar? Are we, reducing our expectations? But actually, a truly inclusive process means that the only way you can get that job is if you've got the right skills, competencies, etc., and values to do it. You can't slip through the net any other way. So thanks for bringing that point in as well. That was a really important one. Pauline, very different context at Dentsu in terms of maturity and global context, and obviously lots of freelancers. It's a very different environment. Perhaps you could just bring to life for us, why it's important at Dentsu and how you make change happen there.
Sure. So let me give some context to Dentsu and my role, because I think that will help with some of the things that I'm going to share. And I'm going to go with two different angles. But firstly, so Dentsu, as I said at the beginning of the call, is a global advertising agency. And I've been there just shy of 3 years. And when I joined, it was very much a network of different companies that had come together. So largely born out of acquisitions and mergers over a number of years, over a good 10, 12-year period. And what that meant was I was joining just at the point where they'd moved from 160 brands, if you can imagine that, 160 different brands, down to what became 6, then 5, and now 6 again. So we're now sort of 6 go-to-market brands. And behind all of that, what you have is globally, we're about 70,000, and I'm responsible in the EMEA region for about 17,000 people. And that's spread across lots of markets. And because it was an acquisition-based organization, you can imagine we had lots and lots of organizations with different processes. So I say that because if you're a small organization, some of what you've heard might sound really scary. Mark said at the beginning, like, it can be adapted. It absolutely can. But we had lots and lots of different size organizations. We had some people that were still wedded to the organization that they joined before it was acquired by a firm that was acquired by another firm acquired by Dentsu. So really deep-rooted sort of processes and procedures and systems, and at points, systems that weren't always necessarily aligned. We also have 3 different types of businesses. We have a very stable media business, which is your standard sort of people that plan campaigns and strategies around how to engage with consumers on behalf of our clients. We've got creatives who are just creative, very different to insurance. And then you've got sort of a data and technology type business as well. So very techie style customer experience management. So you can imagine, again, working across different geographies and different types of people that we're bringing in, having a consistent approach to inclusive hiring is really tough. So that's one angle. And the other side is that I'm a member of our executive team, so our EMEA executive team, and we, bringing that dialogue to them. They're interested on how we drive the organisation from an EMEA perspective. And so when you get down to the intricate details of inclusive hiring, you've got to change that dialogue in order for them to be able to recognise what their role is, because as leaders of the business, as CEOs of the business, they are slightly removed from a regular hiring journey. So with all that context, let me talk about some of the things and why it's important. So at the top of the organisation, of course, our leaders have had goals in place for a number of years now around driving greater diversity. And because diversity measurement for us has been quite challenging, has always largely landed on gender. And so that doesn't necessarily sort of angle or lead towards directly inclusive hiring. You don't go gender and then you think, oh, we'll put an inclusive hiring program in. Instead, what that's done is had people really focused on representation of a particular group. And so what we had to do was to start with is to really help to talk about how inclusive hiring is a gateway for us to be able to create a more inclusive organization overall, that what we learn through inclusive hiring will also help to really drive inclusivity and that sense of belonging for people that join the business. But what we had to do was recognize that it looked different in different markets and in different jurisdictions. And so the first thing is that we didn't try to put a program in that would be suitable for everyone. So that's the first thing, is that actually we worked with individual markets and individual business areas. And that's okay if you've got a very clear view that you want to be able to create a greater inclusive hiring experience, but you also know that you have to address it and approach it differently for different parts of your business. Hopefully at one stage it will all come together and you'll have that really clear plan. But sometimes it's a lot easier to start with a small area or a small business unit or function to be able to start that journey. What we did was we then started to look at what was the process. So we had to understand first what was happening in the business. And we found everything from inaccurate job descriptions, that uninclusive language that was used in certain parts of the way in which we described the skills and experiences that were needed, even down to differences in how we made decisions and who was involved in the hiring process. And so if I took, which is very different, if I took the UK, for example, to DAC, which is Germany, Austria and Switzerland, or to Northern Europe, which is about 9 different countries, including Norway and Sweden, for example. And so what we did is that for each of our markets, we asked the TA teams, our recruitment teams, to really focus on what the process was and what that looked like and where was the lack of skill. Now, in the UK, we're slightly more progressed in the UK market. And so what we did there was we introduced a inclusive hiring training. Now, our people are time poor, probably just about everyone else is time poor. So we went down the route of having e-learning based materials for managers in the hiring process. But we also looked at the job descriptions that they used. We looked at, for one part of the business, particularly in our technology area, introducing technology that allowed us to help train both the recruiter and the hiring manager on the language that they were using in developing those job descriptions. And then in addition to that, we also have looked at how we start to track some of the candidates coming through the process and how they drop off. Now, we use a couple of different systems. The large one, so I'm not plugging any system because I'm sure we all have joys with some of the systems that are out there, but we're using Workday. So there are challenges within the Workday system for us. I actually think that there's a community of us that could come together and really push Workday to make it better, but that's probably for another debate. So we certainly looked at how we could train our hiring managers, our talent acquisition team, and also how we could have more consistency in the skill sets that are required in those job descriptions. The second thing that we did, so for example, if I took our DAC market, in Germany and Austria, it's a very different journey and they were much further behind. And so what we've determined to do is to train just our talent acquisition team. So starting with our talent acquisition team and using the partnership between TA and hiring managers to think about what they need to do in terms of working together in partnership to create a more inclusive experience when candidates come through. For all of our candidates, what we're looking at most specifically is how are we ensuring that we ask for the right adjustments, and that they're not just adjustments, as I've had to explain quite a bit for some of our European markets from a disability perspective, but it's more broadly from an inclusion perspective. How do we make sure that those are made, and how do we help the candidate both through the journey and then, if successful, onboarding into the organisation? So really looking at a holistic approach from that process. And then finally, I wanted to just touch, and I should really probably say also, sorry, I should have said that, templated job descriptions was not something that we did, but trying to ensure that our TA team are very clear and understand the need to make sure we're using templated job descriptions with similar style, so we don't end up with 15 accountabilities 25 different skill sets and capabilities listed that the hiring manager barely looks at anyway, you know, in the process when they're recruiting. The last thing I wanted to say was about the senior end of the organisation, because what we found with the senior end of the organisation is that it's taken a much more unique and individual approach. So really working directly with the TA team, with headhunters directly, to really talk about extending the time to hire. Because we all know that in that pressured environment, when you are racing to get your hire filled before the budget goes or before a headcount's removed, or just because you're in desperate need of bringing someone in, you really can end up speeding up the process and missing out on some great candidates. And so really working on that time to hire, I think has really proved no bounds. And when I look at our executive team that I'm a member of, to see the increase to, we now have 18% representation of people of colour, for example, on our hiring board. And we now have our largest clusters, market areas led by women, some of which new into region and some new to the business overall. So seeing that sort of 35% plus representation at our executive table has also yielded real benefits. And so I start to see that trickle. The dialogue with our senior leaders is very much, what are you doing to drive this dialogue? And I regularly will sit at the table and tell them, this isn't really my job, this is yours. And so really challenging them to own this and to shape it in the most according and appropriate way for their clusters, for their markets. And also, you know, a little bit of healthy competition. And sometimes I might put a few stats up to show who's doing well and who's not. And with that, Kate, I'll hand to you and open for any questions that come along as well.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Pauline, for that. It's interesting, isn't it? Some common themes coming through here, particularly around the job descriptions. And also thanks for articulating the global local, because, you know, what I'm hearing is you've set some principles in place on a global level. So we're all very aware of our parameters and what our objectives are and what we stand for as an organisation. But we can localise the implementation of those to work with the local market, which is, you know, a flexible model that's also clearly an inclusive one, because we're not imposing culture onto culture. So that was useful to hear about as well. So thank you so much for that, Pauline, as well. I'm going to hand it over to questions if people have got them, because I'm just conscious we've had a lot of information. I could talk for the next hour, but I won't, because that's not my job today. Happy to do so with anybody who wants to continue the dialogue. Obviously, just reach out. But Maria, have we got any questions coming through at this stage?
Not at the moment, Kate. Giving people a couple moments to absorb everything that was said, I guess.
Okay, perfect. Well, while everybody's sort of working on the questions, I'd be quite interested to just put this to the panel, and maybe one of them can pick it up in terms of, you know, what can so often happen is we have these great intentions and we set them out. But how do we maintain that consistency, particularly if we're a smaller organisation, we haven't got a big talent acquisition team, we're having to rely on our hiring managers to take the information to follow it through. So I think any tips for people in terms of, well, if we can do this in terms of our job description templates, in terms of our, you know, screening and shortlisting approach, etc., what have people got in terms of top tips for maintaining that consistency and measuring? Anybody like to pick that one up?
I don't mind going there, Kate. I think first and foremost, it's about establishing your why and ensuring that you're communicating to the business the importance of what you're doing. To bring to Pauline's point, this is very much about the business doing this. This shouldn't all be coming from us. One of the most really basic and really effective things that we've implemented here is when a hiring manager raises a requisition, we put an hour in the diary for the briefing call. I've seen it in other places where we give the hiring manager 15 minutes to say, this is what I want, these are the skills, this is this and this and this. We dedicate an hour to that, whereby we can sit with them, talk them through the entire process. We can reiterate the the learning that they've had in the training, reiterate the importance of following the standards that we've got. And as a result of that, a document is created, which is essentially then used as a bit of a soft contract, if you like, which outlines all of the kind of timelines, this is what we are suggesting that we're going to be doing for you, Mr. and Mrs. Manager. This is what we need from you in return. So if you set those guidelines out at the very beginning of the process, everybody's clear in what their expectations and their delivery looks like. And you attach that to the requisition, and it's something that you can, keep going back to. And if you embed that kind of practice and that kind of mindset, people understand where they stand, what is expected of them. And I've found that really effective. That's just one of a few. I don't know if anyone else.
Thanks, Faye. And actually, Mark used the term, we expect it of them, and Pauline used the term, we set expectations. So, Pauline and Mark, anything to add to that in terms of how do we make sure that we can, it isn't just a flash in the pan, and that this is a sustainable change program?
Sure. I mean, I'll pick that up from Lloyd's point of view. I think consistency. So that is one of the main points. That expectation breeds consistency, and then a key thing that really drives it for us is the usability of the approach. No good having a gold-plated approach if it's onerous, it's difficult, and people won't comply with it. And then on the other end, there is taking a continuous improvement approach to it. So, we've got the fantastic frameworks, we've got the training, then, we all know takes quite a bit of time to write up interview notes and this, that, and the other. So we're piloting continuous improvement, like AI taking interview notes for us. And so whenever we can find a part in the process where we can make slicker, sharper, then we do that. And I think it's that continuous improvement cycle aligned with the consistency of the process and the expectation of compliance with the process that means it really does stick.
Thanks, Mark. You brought in, all of that resonates with me, obviously, but you brought in another point there around AI, which I will come back to. Pauline, anything to add, or do we go on to the next question?
No, we can certainly go on to the next question. I think the only other thing I'd say is that that there is no better way of understanding how something's working than to ask, and to ask people that have come through the process to see if it is making an impact. And to ask hiring managers that may have gone through, may have hired recently, but you don't know if they've done that process through. So I think there is something around adding a human touch into all of the data, and I know there'll be a question in here somewhere about data, but that there'll be, to all the data and the insights and the compliance and the governance and so forth, there is an element of human, and I think the more that we can recognize because sometimes there are barriers to the processes and we need to understand how we can get past them, and to do that you need to be able to speak to people.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. It's interesting, isn't it? We've as an organisation, we're culturally shifting really to picking up the phone to people, and I regularly now get calls out the blue from the team that would have been an email last year. It's a more human way of doing business with each other, isn't it, and communicating. So that's another really good tip. Maria, do we have any questions?
We have fantastic questions and not enough time to answer all of them, which always happens, doesn't it? So just bringing a question from Claire Francis to the panel. So I would be really interested to hear views from the panel on the role transparency on pay bands plays in inclusive hiring. I think it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, definitely. Who would like to pick that one up? It's a great question. Thank you for that, Claire.
Well, I'm happy to have a go. So I think this is where you get very differing views at times between hiring teams, diversity teams, etc. We don't publish salaries on our roles. I think there's some evidence that that doesn't always work well, as in candidates kind of screen themselves out, and there's other evidence that it works really well. At a previous employer, we tried both. There wasn't a massively discernible difference. I suppose my personal bent is I'm always in favor of giving the candidate the maximum information. So if I look at myself as a candidate, I probably want that information, but I understand at times there's hesitancy from hiring teams. And I think it's one of those things that I'd be really grateful for a kind of really robust data set that allows us to understand what the pluses and minuses are.
Thanks, Mark. It's an interesting one, isn't it? We come across this particularly in culture audits, where it is that element around transparency, to answer it from that perspective, whereby it depends on your culture and the level of trust and the speak out levels within your organization. Because if it's an organizational culture of low trust or a sector of low trust, then the assumption when there's a lack of transparency is that we're hiding something. In which case our advice and guidance would always be transparency is the right way from an inclusive perspective, because otherwise, the rumour mongers start, and people just assume there's an unfair situation happening, that when maybe it isn't, just for the sake of providing openness around the data. But that's my personal view from Clear Company perspective. But Faye and Pauline, anything to add on that question? It's a really good one. It's a really hot topic. No.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's it is a good topic. It's a good question. It's live because, of course, we've got the pay transparency for those that have businesses in the EU, and so we're going to see a lot more on pay transparency. If your organisations aren't doing it, really thinking about what that means for them, and how they approach it, and how they bed it into, not just from a hiring perspective, but from a career framework perspective and progression perspective. So I think there's a lot more to be said. I mean, I certainly think, and this is a personal perspective, I think there are two angles of both candidates understanding, and this is often, I come out of financial services for a large period of time, so you see that much more in FS, but certainly being very clear about what the range is that I'm looking for, but I'm also very confident in having that dialogue with with the organisations. And I think the more that we can help individuals to be able to have the dialogue about what range they're looking for as well, creates that two-way dialogue. That's just a personal view that I think all too often, especially candidates that are underrepresented from disadvantaged backgrounds or others, don't have that skill or the confidence to be able to have that dialogue. And I think the more that we can create holistic solutions that puts the power in their hands as much as the organisation just publishing those ranges, I think will really help to shift overall the sort of starting point of where people come into organisations. So I think it's a live debate, but it's much broader than just hiring as pay transparency legislation comes to full force.
Thanks, Pauline. Thanks for that extra element on the debate as well. Faye, anything to add, or do you want to pick up another question?
But let's move on, Kate. I've got nothing.
Okay, let's pick up another one. What else have we got, Maria?
We have another question here. How do you hold your hiring managers accountable for being reluctant or not doing it at all to change their approach to hiring with a D&I focus, or when they're not complying with the company ethos?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little bit like what I tabled to our panelists at the beginning, which is how do we get people to engage? We can set up the system, set up the process, take people to the training, but the question is, if there's resistance, and there is, I've been in many a Lloyd's market, Markel and Lloyd's included, where I've been faced with a room full of people with their arms folded, and my mission in life is to get them to leave the room with that open stance of, I'm listening and I'm hearing. I've got some views on that, but I'd like to hear from our panel. Faye, can I come to you first on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest resistance is a time factor. I don't think it comes from anybody having any sort of bad intentions or not agreeing with anything that we deliver via training or that we embed more broadly in our processes. A lot of the resistance comes from, I just don't have the time. So that's why, back to Pauline's point, I think it's really important for us to take the time at the beginning of that journey and ensure that and reiterate the importance of doing it. On the more drastic end of measures, we've appointed a new lady to head up our D&I space, and she's come from organisations where she's actually implemented some kind of financial structure that is attached to people's D&I hiring. So something that we might investigate. I think it's quite drastic. And the only other thing I was going to mention was, you've lost me. I'll come back to it.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries.
Go on.
That's good advice already. I mean, I'll throw it open in a minute. There's a couple that spring to mind for me, which is about talking to the managers themselves. So it's what makes them tick, what language they want to hear. So in the insurance market, for example, or in engineering, construction, this is a risk averse. Risk is everything in these organisations. So if you can frame the fact that the inclusive hiring minimises the risk of that appointment process, that can get their attention. That can get their attention very definitely. And I know, Mark, you said at the beginning of your conversation about setting those expectations, and also I think around measuring from a culture pulse survey or employee engagement survey the levels of engagement on this level, within hiring, within different managers' remits can work as well. But Mark, I know you've done quite a lot on this at Lloyd's in terms of the manager engaging. So if you've got anything to add to the, how do we deal with the resistors? Or do we just focus on those that we can actually bring with us is another point.
No, I think we do lean into the resistors. I mean, number one is you've got to be accredited to actually hire, right? So so there's a process point, which means it's, you've got to get on the bus to a certain extent in order to be able to hire. And if you don't want to do that, your hiring is delayed and you only have yourself to be blamed, right? So I think that process point is important. There's hearts and minds, but there's also the process kind of enforcing that compliance. And then there's kind of spot checks that we do every now and then. So we go in and we have a dip sample and look through a number of recruitment processes, and we might give people feedback on that. And then there's the data that goes monthly back to the heads of people and the SLT teams to say, this is what your hiring is look like against our particular hiring ambitions, and here's how you're performing. And if you're not performing up to snuff over a while, then we'll go and have a look at some of the recruitment processes within that. So look, I'm a believer that you have to win the hearts and minds a bit, but behind that needs to be the process to reinforce your ambitions, and then the audit, the continuous improvement, and the data that kind of allows you to reinforce that. So that's our kind of multi-pronged approach.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. And I know, Pauline, you said in your presentation that a bit of healthy competition doesn't go amiss either if you publicise who's doing well and who's maybe trailing a bit. I think we've got time for one more question.
Fantastic. So we have a question that was framed as a question for Mark, but I think more members of the panel might be interested in responding as well. So interested in how Lloyd's embedded their competency framework.
Do you want to start with that, then, Mark?
Yeah, really good question. So we have a values framework, and that values framework at Lloyd's has some behavioral indicators, both positive and negative, and those have been used now and promoted for a number of years in respect to the performance management process. And also there's a kind of values recognition scheme that sits behind that. And when we just kind of took a step back, what we thought was, well, why do we have this kind of competency or this behavioral kind of assessment for people in the organization, but we're not doing that in recruitment? So we worked very closely with Kate's team at Clear Company and a project team of operations, our learning folks, and our talent acquisition folks to create a kind of competency-based framework, which was leveled and then embedded into the recruitment process for each level. So that's how we did it. And then we introduced that framework, and then our inclusive hiring accredited course was then amended to reflect that framework and take people through it. So everyone who'd been through it previously is going through a refresher. Any of the new folks are going through the whole shebang. But that's how we did it. And I think I would really kind of focus on two things. Number one, the importance of getting a competency framework right. Too often, in my experience, I've seen competency frameworks which aren't competency frameworks, which aren't leveled and have been just kind of tacked on over time. And that's something that we'll be doing with Clear Company for the Lloyd's market, is putting on a session in July around what is a competency framework, what are the pitfalls, what should you be looking for. And I think that is a very important part of the recruitment process, because if you get that right, the evidence-based selection that comes out of that is repeatable, you can evidence against it. So the process that we went through, I think, was very important. And of course, having massive buy-in to the Lloyd's values meant that most of the hiring managers, when we brought in this framework, that makes absolute and complete sense. So all of that was part of how we got that in place.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much for that response. And definitely, and it comes back to when I started the discussion, we did a fireside chat which James in our team kindly facilitated. And one of the points that came out of that was that despite organisations training their hiring managers, putting good job descriptions together, the problem was coming at making that inclusive hiring decision. Because actually the information and the evidence we were looking for wasn't right in the first place, and wasn't robust enough to be scrutinized and to avoid bias and have individual judgment calls on it. So it's that foundational point is so key. So thank you for sharing that. We are at the end of our hour, which is just unreal, but I wanted to thank the panelists very much. I know you're all incredibly busy. It's 2024 is the busiest year for everybody, is what I'm feeling. So we really value and appreciate and respect your time. And I'm sure if anybody wants to reach out to any of you to connect, you'd be delighted to do that. I also just wanted to point out that as part of the Recruitment Industry Disability Initiative, although it is focused around disability inclusion, it is inclusion. And we have a pioneering network. It's completely free to join. It puts you in a community with other people who want to continue this dialogue and move things on together collectively, and details of that will come out to you also. We'd really welcome anybody who's found this debate important and would like to continue it. Please do come to us. We will be inviting all of you to have a little go at the Clear Company Inclusive Hiring digital program, which is Faye's seen very recently. It's just been refreshed in the interest of continuous improvement. So we thought we'd give you all a little play with that as well. And if there's anything else that you need from us or would like to talk to us about further, or connect you with other people who come up in the conversation today, please do reach out. This is a very important agenda for the Clear Company. We want to lead it. And if there's anything more we can be doing, please do let us know. But end on a massive thank you to the audience. You're also all really busy, sticking with us. Any questions outstanding, we will endeavour to put in the feedback for you and answer those. If any of them are really urgent and critical, please do direct messages at the Clear Company and we'll do our best to respond for you. But have a really fantastic end of the day.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, panellists.